Hello and welcome back to the Schooner Pod. I'm your host, Bobby Howard. With me today, we got Ty Lee. Jameson is on his honeymoon. The wedding went great, I would say. What do you think? What do you think, Ty? What if you had to do a review of Jameson's wedding? Where would you rate it? What would you rate it? Is it good?
It was very good. Yeah, it was.
Yeah,
It was
definitely
very
good.
fun.
Yeah, great
I
time.
know, was it better than yours? I don't know. Was it better than mine? I don't know.
It's a top 3 Schooner Pod wedding for sure. To say the
Yeah,
least.
it's in the top 3.
It's it's in the top 3. Great stuff. But look, we're here to talk about so like the last time we talked, our biggest thing was talking about the OU SEC move potentially getting not delayed, but staying with the original plan of 2025. It was almost immediately fixed because a day later OU and Texas announced with the SEC and the Big 12 that they would be leaving in 2024. So July 1st, 2024, we have an official date, signed, sealed, delivered, which meant that most of that podcast was kind of for nothing, but it's okay because it's done. We're finally done. No more speculation, Ty. So
yeah,
yeah,
I think it's good. It obviously, like you said, the podcast was not as evergreen as we had hoped. But if you go back and listen, or if you have listened to that one, if you haven't, it's probably not worth going back and listening. But the tone was very disappointed, I suppose, when we sort of found out that the prevailing narrative was going to be that we were going to remain. So overwhelmingly positive, I believe, for OU and for Texas as well, and for at least one of the conferences going forward, that we have wrapped this, and we now have a firm, set in stone, more or less, departure date and then landing date over at the SEC. And I just want to reiterate that for me personally, I'm glad that we get this one-off marquee Super Big 12 season thing where OU gets to go play some neat teams that we probably won't face again, especially in their home stadiums. Who knows? I mean, with the way the out of conference stuff is scheduled so far and going, probably the only time in our lifetimes, in a regular season at least, we'd be going. Who knows with the way the playoff will go, but probably the only time in our lifetimes we'll get to see an OU game in Provo, Utah, and then in Cincy. So
yeah, I mean that is something that is nice, and I think it's nice that it's just a one-off. I think if we had to sit through 2 of them, it'd be a little annoying. But it's the first time OU's ever played in Provo against BYU. The first time OU has ever played at Nippert Stadium in Cincinnati. They did play Cincy on the road, but that was at Paul Brown Stadium. So 2 cool road environments OU's never played in. And then also getting UCF to Norman for the first time in their history. The first matchup between those 2 schools. So on a one-off, it's kind of fun. I can get up for that. But getting closer to the SEC, all the excitement it brings, all the new teams, the new challenges. But, I think for me that's the biggest thing. That's what I'm really, really pumped about. And it makes sense for the Big 12, honestly. Just move on in multiple ways. Just kind of start off with your new schools, and then also try to expand a little bit. The Pac-12 has been in just TV deal hell right now, as we've seen. But I think it makes sense for the Big 12 as well.
absolutely. I mean, there is something to be said about just ripping the Band-Aid off, so to speak. We got some final details, I suppose, on how the deal was structured for the departure. So it looks like OU and Texas will be foregoing, I believe it was about $100 million in revenue combined between the schools, about $20 million of which is going to go to Fox Networks as compensation for, I suppose, lost revenue over a year for, I believe it was 7 games that they had in their contracts for hosting between both universities. And then out of the remaining money, I think the figure I heard was something around $10 million or so a piece to I suppose, the original Big 12 schools, not the new incoming schools, as compensation for them as well. So it ended up being a positive. Obviously, for the network, I guess if the network was just after a little cash infusion and a $10 million cash infusion, definitely doesn't hurt some of these programs within the Big 12. And I'm not trying to talk crap on them, but some of the smaller universities, that 10 million is a nice little bump. And like we talked about in the last pod when we discussed this schedule that the Big 12 has for next year, some of these schools got to get their last laugh on us and then get their little payday as we leave town. So
Yeah, and the payday could have been worse in the contract and the Big 12, grant of rights contract and all that. It would have been a little bit higher, about half as much higher. So OU and Texas were able to negotiate that down to just 50 per, which, like you said, that's a nice little windfall, especially because they're splitting the 10-team pot 14 ways this year and 12 the rest of the way. So that is going to be that's a nice little parting gift for them. I think it's fine. It's not the chunk of flesh that I think a lot of Big 12 schools thought they could get out of the two, but it's not bad. It's not bad. So I'm glad they were able to resolve it though. And Fox, I guess, getting that Texas Michigan game pretty quick. Good on you, I guess. But no, I don't know. I think all parties are pretty happy about this one here, to say the least. And I know I'm excited about the SEC across the board, trying, seeing new places, seeing, obviously the OU football, seeing the teams come in to Norman is going to be incredibly exciting. But also like softball competition is going to be fun. OU basketball won't be like instantly dead. So that's plus. That's a plus. Hey, they finally showed a bit of life earlier this week, last night. Recording this on a Wednesday, beating Kansas State at home in front of approximately 200 people, I'm sure, which makes sense because they've been pretty bad recently. So, anyways, I digress. And we'll have a lot of stuff talking about the SEC, the hype as we build closer and get Jameson on board as well. Got a lot of stuff in that as we count down the days to July 1st, 2024.
absolutely. And I do want to touch on real quick, Bobby, and hear your thoughts on, I know there's been some debate between you specifically and some of our other friends about what is the benefit for OU and Texas for leaving early. And now that we have these hard financial figures out here and we're seeing that OU is paying out $50 million and then also seeing announced that we will not be collecting full revenue from the SEC. Maybe the stuff I read didn't have it, or it's not out there public, but it sounded like it was substantially lower, potentially half or lower. There might be a firm figure out there, and for some reason I just didn't see it. So it does seem like this will be in terms of money, when you look at those two figures, just distributions from the conferences, it seems like this will be a money losing move, at least for the first year for OU and Texas.
Yeah, no, I mean, initially it's not going to offset it perfectly. It's not going to be a perfect offset for sure. But yeah, it's going to be interesting, I think, for sure. The comments here are great. But no, it definitely, it's not perfect. But I think leaving is more important. Getting immediately into the SEC where you can, get used to that competition. And not only that, but let's just be honest, the amount of money generated when you have teams like Florida, Alabama, Arkansas, even like Missouri, Texas A&M coming to Norman rather than West Virginia, Texas Tech and Iowa State, like that's a game changer. You're going to get better attendance. You're going to get better donations. I imagine donations are way up already because people know that it's coming. It's coming fast, and the way to get on that, the way to get on that thing, and the way to improve things is to donate. You have to, if you want to win in the SEC, you got to put up some major bucks, or else you're not you're going to fall behind the pack. And I think kind of getting to that earlier, getting it more tangible, that's the second that real SEC schedule, you see it in print, you see it, you have real dates that this team's coming to town. That's going to be infinitely exciting and will fire up this fan base. And I think that's definitely a good thing. So yeah, on the TV side of things, definitely a bit of a hit, but on the overall scale and scope of things, exciting stuff.
I think you're right. I think there is still the argument to be said there, though, that all of those benefits of having these big games, the driving sort of more engagement, more people physically coming to the games, especially right when we start. I think the counter argument to that would be that stuff would have all happened in 2025 as well. So there definitely are some, depending on how you frame it, I think there certainly are still some question marks. But I think when you really look at it from OU and Texas's standpoint, we didn't gain a whole lot. I think it was very much worth the $50 million hit right away to go out and to make the move. We weren't gaining anything by hanging around. So again, we got some, I think, cool benefits with one sort of super Big 12 season. Maybe we get a chance to sort of redeem ourselves and not completely run out with our tail between our legs. And I do think you're right, though. I think overall, no one is debating that overall this is the better financial decision. That $50 million hit on TV deals will be very quickly recuperated with new TV deals coming down the road. And I think you mentioned a good point on people just being excited. I think this will be a great moneymaker and drive for the city of Norman as well, because I expect for the first couple years and on, as we begin to see how the SEC is going to be structured, they haven't put anything in stone yet, but they've sort of announced over and over that they want to do away with divisions, and they're just going to have one big pool of teams. And I think that's a really neat way to do things, because it gives you that flexibility season on, to really look at the teams coming up in the season and create some really cool matchups, some really cool schedules. So, but I think that as we see teams, the first time that they're coming to Norman, I think people will be very surprised how well they travel. And that's not at all to diminish. We have some teams within the Big 12 that obviously travel super well and come down to Norman and make a great showing of themselves as a whole, and in both their demeanor and then just how strong they travel. But I think the SEC is going to take it up a whole different notch. So that will be exciting, like you said, Bobby, to see all of those fan bases coming into town. There are some fan bases maybe not so excited to see coming into town as well.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that adjustment works, because the way Saturdays in the South are handled in the SEC, OU's not there yet. We're not ready yet. We don't go as hard as they do with tailgates. We need to step that up. I think OU travels great. I think traveling isn't the issue on OU's end, but in terms of being a host, they need to step it up a little bit. But the best way to do that is just through, I think going to other places and taking ideas and taking inspiration from how they do it, and then applying it to your campus, your side of things. But we've talked about the whole tailgating situation and how to improve that and all that, like ad nauseum, but a lot. We have usually like a pod a year about it, but it's going to be something that OU and Norman need to step up. But I think they can do it. I think they can improve. There's a lot of room for growth. You just kind of have to adapt a little bit.
Yeah, I will say I don't know that OU is necessarily that far behind. I think if you really looked at the SEC as a whole, I think you could make a very fair argument that even just looking at tailgate atmosphere or party atmosphere, game day atmosphere, whatever you want to term it as, I think you can make a pretty fair argument that they are maybe pretty top heavy in that respect as well, because I think you could start to rattle off plenty of schools that have cool atmospheres, but I don't know if you could objectively say that they're doing a whole lot necessarily that much better than OU. I do also want to say, just to sort of stir the pot a little bit start our shit talking before we go in there, there is also an aspect of some of these places it's just the only thing that they have to hang on to, and maybe there's a propaganda aspect as well. I'm not going to name any names, but some pretty prominent tailgating schools that I don't want to say they don't live up to the hype, but if you're saying we may have lost the game but we never lose a party, you're just saying, yeah, our program isn't that good, but we like to go out and hang out and tailgate and party afterwards. So I'm sure most people know specifically who says that saying a lot, but there definitely is a propaganda aspect as well. I think as an OU fan, I constantly think that there's a lot of things OU could do better in terms of just the way they zone campus for game days, where it will just create a better atmosphere. And we've talked about this, like you said, so much. And my stance is generally just if we consolidated things, not made them smaller, but just made things a little bit closer together, and just the way you zone certain tailgate areas and stuff, we would have an atmosphere that if you came in as an outsider, you'd say, oh my goodness, yeah, this is crazy. And I would argue that OU's game day atmosphere, maybe not every time, but on several times out of the year, rivals anywhere in the SEC. And I think you'd be surprised with some of those SEC schools as well. They have down weeks as well. So,
yeah, and I think a big thing is there hasn't usually been a ton to get excited about OU home games. Sometimes you get a big one, like Ohio State was massive. It was incredible. Like the energy there felt completely different. I think the same you could say for like our freshman year, for example, Tennessee. I feel like there was a bit of an energy there as well. And I think having that on a week to week basis where, you know, at least when it's new, when everything's like on a honeymoon basis where we're having teams come in that we haven't seen, I think that energy will translate to tailgating strength and atmosphere and all that. Notre Dame in 1982 in the comments, absolutely right. That was a crazy, crazy day of tailgating. We know how to put it on whenever it's big time, but if it's like even Kansas State, who's been a very, very good conference opponent in the past couple of years, I don't think people get up for K-State. I don't think people get up for obviously not for Kansas, but really, what Big 12 teams do you get up for? Like if it's an OU home game, like let's you can maybe Bedlam, but I don't think we even really respect Oklahoma State that much to get up for Bedlam in the way that they do, and that's it. Like maybe there'll be a random team that's good, but other than that, you know, in the newish Big 12, it's not been a lot to get excited about.
Yeah, I think that argument's there. I think to wrap it back to the SEC comparisons, I feel like I may have made this comparison before. Maybe it was in our group text, maybe it was on the podcast, but I think the best thing I am projecting, because I can't compare SEC teams coming to Norman beyond that Tennessee game, like you mentioned, but in a regular season atmosphere, obviously I can't compare that. But I would expect most every game, maybe not in the first couple seasons, because I think there's going to be a really exciting newness, but I think I would expect a travel atmosphere and a tailgate atmosphere more in line with when Nebraska came to Norman recently. They traveled very well, as Nebraska does. They travel well. They have a fan base that travels well. But I think that sort of atmosphere, maybe the fans are acting a little bit differently than Nebraska fans did. Not to say that it's worse, but I think just a little differently. But I think that atmosphere you could expect to be sort of the baseline, because I think you're going to see that OU fans, I know there's a constant argument against OU fans and even OU's team that we don't really get up for a lot of games. And I don't think that's necessarily an unfair argument. There's definitely an argument to be had there. I don't necessarily know if we're unique in that way, like some people think we are. I think there's a lot of other schools that are supposedly, you know, the mecca of college football, and then they have like 4,000 people in their community park because they don't have a stadium. So I don't necessarily know that our atmosphere is that bad, but I think you'll see that when it really, really matters to the other team, you know, it's hard to not care when it really, really matters to the other side.
Yeah, and I think one of the aspects about Nebraska being so good is they don't care if they're good or not. Like they show up and they try. They were like ready to get their ass kicked, and they were still having a good time. They're still fired up. So there is that. There is that. Yeah, that Bama 1982 is talking about when Bama came to OU. Yeah, they showed up early. That was the same case with Ohio State. They rolled in mass in 2016, like because we had that one parking lot. We'd park at the LNC and take the little bus to class, and that's you're just kind of having to wade through all these Ohio State fans kind of through all of it. But yeah, no, I think there's a lot more to discuss about it, a lot more exciting things down the pipe for sure. Do we have any other news to talk about OU? I know softball started and got off to a great start, went 5-0. Had a little bit of a scare against Washington, but other than that, look, that's 3 ranked wins, Ty. So I think OU's off to a great start.
Yeah, that is a great start. So I don't know, I haven't been following it, obviously, but a 5-0 start, all ranked wins. It's hard to argue against that, especially in a sport that is as competitive as softball is, in the sense that there's a higher potential for upsets throughout the season than, say, football.
Definitely. Yeah, just a lot of games. So, took out ranked Duke, who has Sydney Romero on staff, OU legend. Ran ruled number 17/14 Stanford, and then narrowly took out the Washington Huskies as well. So they got some stuff going on a little bit later. They're playing in a tournament in Waco for some reason and playing Army there, in addition to Stephen F. Austin, Longwood, and Baylor. So lots of stuff coming down the pipe for OU softball. Lots of good stuff that I'm definitely excited for. And as 1982 said, visor off to Nicole May. She is awesome. So, yeah. So that's kind of the softball rundown. Baseball's coming up. We're getting very close to that. Trying to figure out a weekend for our 999 challenge. That'll be great. Women's gym keep rolling, doing great. Same with the men's, and
women are third, I believe, in the national rankings, and I think that the men are currently the second ranked team in the nation. So obviously doing pretty well in those sports. OU's core sports, the sports that we're actually good at, softball and then gymnastics, we are doing well. So hopefully one day, plucky old OU will have a football team that is relevant nationally. But in our core sports, we're still strong.
Now, I mean, we're clearly just we're a softball / gym school, and it's been that way for a cool minute. But yeah, so that is kind of that. OU women's basketball still rolling. OU men's basketball, don't really know what to think of you. Still not great, but I guess you beat Kansas State somehow. So they have a big game against Texas coming up this weekend. So I don't know.
I do have a correction. I believe men's gymnastics is actually number 1 in the nation now. It sounds like the rankings have yet to come out, but just this past weekend, they were number 2. They faced off in a meet against number 1 Stanford, and we won. So I don't really necessarily know how rankings work in gymnastics, but it would be a crime if we were not now number 1 in the updated rankings after beating number 1 head-to-head and being number 2.
I mean, you would think so. Crazy stat out of that. OU men's gym has not lost a home game. Has not a home match since like 2007. So that is a absolute dynasty going on there. But okay, that's kind of our news rundown. Still waiting on spring football to come out. A couple guys got scholarships. That's good stuff. But Ty, I think that's all we have for this episode. What do you final thoughts on anything before we sign off here?
Nope. This was just sort of a wrapping up loose ends podcast because, as everyone knows, last week, we released that one and then it just immediately got upended. So glad we could sort of wrap up some loose ends and I think at this point in the off season, although it is rough for making content, we are at that point in the off season where no news is good news. It would not be a good thing. I don't think. I can't think of any breaking headlines about OU football that would come out at sort of this point in the off season that would be good news. So we're not hearing about, so and so had some crazy injury or any sort of scandal or anything else. So that no news is good news at this point in the cycle that we're at. So I know it's dry content wise, but thankfully we have these conference realignment storylines and whatnot to sort of keep us going. But it's a blessing and a curse that we don't have any sort of big breaking OU football news.
Yeah, and I mean, really, if anything happened, it'd be Fulmer Cup type of stuff, and you obviously don't want that to happen. So, nothing. You don't want anything going on with that. So, yeah, just kind of waiting for this dang thing to start. Super Bowl. Duh. The Super Bowl happened. Shout out to Creed Humphrey, Orlando Brown, for winning their first Super Bowl rings. Then as well as, Blake Bell, getting his as well. And then James Winchester. So very, very solid for those guys. Jalen Hurts, hell of an effort, but just came up short. So, all right. Ty, I think you're muted, my guy.
I was on mute. I was going to say that was unfortunate for Jalen Hurts specifically, but I think, not trying to start a debate or anything, but I think Jalen Hurts was the best player in that Super Bowl, hands down. He played his heart out, and I think hopefully he knows that. Hopefully he feels that he left it all out on the table. So,
oh yeah, he was completely dynamic for sure. So, all right, folks, that is the end of this episode of the Schooner Pod. We'll see you next week when we scrounge up some more stuff to talk about. Off-season stuff out here, folks. But until that time, for me and Ty, hope you have a good one. Boomer Sooner, everybody.